Hey everybody, welcome back to Vanta EDC. Today I'm going to be doing a comparison video, which I don't think I've done any comparison videos before, but this one's been a long time coming. Before you, this is the ProTech Mordax and this is the ProTech Malibu. Both obviously made by ProTech, and they're both button lock manual knives, which is funny for ProTech because they're known for their automatic knives, but these two designs amongst people that are into button locks have been relatively popular and in very high demand. So, as someone who personally really enjoys button lock knives in particular and is looking for quote unquote the ideal or perfect EDC button lock for me, these two knives are ones that I felt I needed to get some good hands-on time for myself to experience and decide. And yeah, I'm glad I did. And so, yeah, in particular, so ProTech really kind of popularized button locks with the Malibu, which I think came out like 2019 or something like that. But they actually released, I believe they released, actually, wait. See, okay. So I don't actually know if this came out before the Malibu, but the Mordax, we'll get into this a little more later, but it's actually a collaboration between Ferrum Forge, who designed a non-button lock, frame lock version of the Mordax. They worked with ProTech to design the button lock version, basically. So the Malibu has been huge and really popularized button locks, but the Mordax has kind of been like this second ProTech model that hasn't seen as much production, but has its own kind of following as best I can tell. So in terms of US produced button lock knives, like production, I guess, tier button lock knives, I would argue that ProTech is the best. Not that they have much, like literally the only models they have are this and the Cambria, which I don't think they're producing anymore as of the last few years. But yeah, these knives, these two models alone have really established ProTech as the best, I would say the best US production button lock makers. And so that's not to comment on, Chinese or overseas makers. I think Knife has been making a big push and I guess making a strong case for themselves for being the best kind of non-US production button locks. But in terms of US production button locks, I think these are the best. So what I'll do is I'll get into like comparison of the specs between these two models, but then I'll go into the more subjective stuff, just my own experiences, the differences in carrying and using, and then just my recommendations, who I think the Mordax is a better fit for, who I think the Malibu is a better fit for, that sort of thing. So that being said, specs. So I mentioned this was designed originally by Ferrum Forge, but in collaboration with ProTech to make it a button lock version. And then the Malibu, as far as I understand, is a in-house ProTech design. So there's no particular designer associated with the model. And now the blade lengths. So this is the reverse Tanto version of the Malibu, and the blade length is supposed to be 3.25 inches long. And the Mordax, this is supposed to have a 3.5-inch long blade. So only a quarter-inch difference in length, with the Mordax being the larger knife. As you can see, this is a true top-down view, in case you're wondering. So there's not really going to be much angle skewing of your perspective. Now, overall weight, the Malibu in this configuration with the aluminum scales is 2.99 ounces. You can definitely get heavier versions, either titanium scales or brass aluminum. Excuse me. And then there's like super bougie, like ProTech custom, like mother of pearl inlay stuff. I don't even know what the weight on those is, but yeah. And then the baseline Mordax without this honeycomb milling, I believe, is 3.84 ounces, and with this milling is lighter. I think it's in the like 3.6, 3.7 range. I don't know the exact number on that one. So this is heavier, for sure. And this is also aluminum scales, this version. So I think all the ProTech Mordaxes, other than like a super small like prototype or like limited run, are aluminum scales. Now, handle width, which is a spec, or kind of a measurement that only some people care about. I definitely care about it just because of like kind of how it slides into pocket. The Malibu is 0.48 inches thick, and then the Mordax is 0.50 inches thick. So basically 2/100ths of an inch thicker, which is, negligible to some. So yeah. Now materials, in terms of blade steels, most commonly you'll see the Malibu in 20 CV, but the ProTech has been lately producing more magna cut versions. And the Mordax, originally the first kind of runs that were released in partnership with Drop. They were all 20 CV, I believe. I don't know if there's any other variants other than 20 CV. Nowadays, I've only really seen the newest production versions of the Mordax coming out in magna cut. And with the Malibu as well, there's also Damascus versions, like the fancier, like custom versions or whatever, the above the just basic production tier. Now with the scales, I'd mentioned that these versions are both aluminum, which is the base kind of, base configuration for both these models. But then with the Malibu, you can get titanium and brass scales, as I mentioned before. So, and then the action for both run on bearings. So, and I got some spit there. Yeah, so both run on bearings. So very smooth action. Very different feel for different reasons, and I'll get into that actually now. So now just kind of, I've mentioned the specs, but now I'm going to talk more about my experience with these two and just how they differ and how they might be similar. So kind of the big categories to address when it comes to experience. The first one, carry profile. As you can see, when closed, just in general, but for sure when closed, the Malibu is a smaller model. Now, that being said, the thickness of it is actually only 2/100ths of an inch thinner. And in some ways, it's weird. I can't really explain it very well. I have like a hypothesis, but the Mordax, even though it is technically thicker, feels thinner in pocket. And I think it might have to do with just the fact that, at least partially due to the fact that at least one half, like the spine of the scales, is not chamfered heavily the way that the Mordax scales are chamfered all the way around the entire border of the scales. So I don't know if that's part of it, but carry profile, the Malibu technically is like it's smaller footprint and a little thinner, but in some ways the carry profile of the Mordax is more comfortable, I guess you could say. So yeah, I know that's not very helpful for people that like objective data, but that's just the way I can describe it based on my own experience. Now, when it comes to actual ergonomics and comfort when the knives are deployed, the ergonomics definitely go to the Mordax for me. So if you watch any reviews or my review on the Mordax, I'm a really big fan of these ergonomics, and I think Ferrum Forge has a reputation in particular of really doing a good job on knife designs that are, very natural ergonomics, very comfortable ergonomics. And so a huge part of that are these two pronounced finger trolls, one on the blade and one on the scales right here. So it's easy to choke up. It's comfortable to be just fully on the scales and not on the blade at all. The ramp back here at the butt of the handle is really comfortable to kind of press grip into the palm. It doesn't really it doesn't create any hot spots at all. Like the clip as well, it's fairly low profile. And then I briefly mentioned the chamfering around the edges of the scales. I think that definitely adds to it. There's no hard edges. There's no it's just very smooth in hand. Now the Malibu doesn't have bad ergonomics, but it doesn't have a finger choil, which that is a subjective preference. I will readily admit or whatnot. But yeah, so you can't choke up, and I think for me, with this being a long enough blade where it'd be nice to have that option to get a little higher up on the blade, especially for finer work. I wish I had a finger choil on this. And then when it comes to the scales don't have bad ergonomics again, but notice how the finger choil on the scales is not as deep, so it doesn't lock you in as much. And then here, there's not really any, there's no real grooves for other fingers. There is this chamfering here. You notice there's one chamfer and then this second chamfer here a little longer. So it does kind of create like a pseudo grip contour, but at the same time, it's not like locked in tight the way that when I'm handling the Mordax, I have no concern about slipping off of it, slipping up, or yeah, just in general like losing a strong grip on it. So yeah, so I definitely give the ergonomics to the Mordax, and in a way the comfort as well. So now let's talk about the action. The action on these is very different. They're both smooth, but the Mordax has a heavier, heftier blade. And so, I mean, I don't know how well it comes through on the audio, but the sound to me is indicative of the difference in the snappiness or the kind of the authority with which the blade deploys and closes. The Malibu has a lighter blade. It's a shorter blade. So this sounds a little more hollow. It's snappier. It feels quicker. Like it can snap out quicker, especially with the push button there. But it doesn't feel as hefty. It doesn't feel as strong of a deployment. Not that it feels weak. It's just like the Mordax, like it feels like you're deploying a full-size knife blade. So that's definitely a subjective preferencing at the end of the day. But I surprisingly found myself liking the action of the Mordax more, because it does feel like I'm a fidgeter. I fidget with my knife more than I do anything else with it, and so yeah, I just enjoy the feeling of being able to very quickly, or not quickly, but to very confidently deploy and close the blade. The nice thing with the Mordax too is if you only like partially disengage the lock, let it go, the blade will close on its under its own weight, as like kind of simulating the drop shut effect that you get on like frame locks and liner locks. Which I know it's not actually important, but it's just adds to the fidget factor of this knife. Whereas with the Malibu, if you partially disengage the lock, it doesn't want to go under its own weight. It doesn't take much to get to go, but you do have to induce the closure of the blade. Maybe that could change if you switched out the bearings to like skiff bearings or something like that, but I'm not going to bother to do that with my Malibu, at least not in the near future. Okay, so another difference in experience. Now the lockup over time has been better with the Malibu. Like even after who knows how many deployments, probably 500, 600, 700 deployments on the Malibu, you might be able to hear that. But like it is marginal, if anything, in terms of blade play. And so, yeah, this is a surprisingly very strong knife. For a knife that is very snappy, it's a very strong lockup. Now with the Mordax, the lockup right now, it's actually less audible, but I can feel it more, the amount of wiggle in the pivot. What I've noticed is that just with like not even with much time, but basically the pivot, I believe, is just the pivot screw walks loose ever so slightly. And I think my hypothesis is because of just the overall weight of the blade is heftier. So I think just with, again, I've opened each of these knives probably 500 to 750 times at least. And so I think that they don't do enough Loctite or any Loctite at all from the factory. I've actually put my own Loctite on it, but I don't know if I did a good enough job cleaning it beforehand or I didn't put enough Loctite, so it still wiggles loose. But I mean, you can always, this is a T pivot, you can always just tighten it ever so slightly, and yeah, I've reduced the lockup to nothing, and it'll still drop shut fine. Like partially disengaged lock still drop shut. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. I've heard at least one other person complain of the same issue with their Mordax, so I don't know if that's just fundamental to the design or the lack of, Loctite on certain, assembled items that had been sent out from ProTech. So yeah, lockup I would give to the Malibu, but the Mordax is a strong knife. It's just a matter of keeping that pivot locked down tight and not letting it walk loose over time. So yeah. Now, the last kind of experience thing, I guess you could say, would be comparatively would be the aesthetics. And as hopefully all of us knows, aesthetics are very subjective and personal. And so for me personally, I find myself more drawn to the Mordax. Personally, I like the curved lines. I like where it's curved. I like where it's more straight and like it's not perfectly straight, but this like the whole contour from the top of the across the spine of the blade, across the spine of the handles, like that. Yeah, I like the end of the handle here. I like the milling more. I like this milling pattern and the fact that it's kind of like a pseudo bolster look versus this all scaled like diamond crosshatch pattern. I do not like the aesthetics of this personally. And so, yeah, I mean, not every variant of the Mordax has this, and not every variant of the Malibu has this, but I think of all the smooth variants or textured variants, this pattern is my favorite pattern between the two models. So yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, aesthetics are personal. So I like the Mordax a little bit more. I don't think the Malibu's ugly by any means, but I think I like this more. In some ways, it looks more like a knife, like a more, I guess, not conventional, but you know, a more common perception of what a knife would look like. And yeah, I just like this. So that's me. Now, I'm going to get into kind of who I would recommend each of these models for and kind of why, I guess. So I'll start with the Mordax, and I'll start there because, I mean, ironically, kind of the stereotypical person I would recommend this for is not me in some ways. And this was not a knife that I bought thinking I was going to like it as much as I do, but I'm glad I bought it, and I like it a lot. So, but in general, I would recommend this for people, especially like if you want to button lock a solid button lock knife with, you know, great blade steel, great, you know, great tolerances, you know, very well thought out design. I would recommend, if you have large hands or larger than large size hands, then I would go this route. And that's simply because you have the space to grip. So with my medium sized hands, there's still plenty of room for another pinky, not even more than another of my pinkies personally. And then when I choke up, I have way more room. So this is a very amenable design for anyone with large hands and up. And as someone who has smaller than large hands, certainly it's still very, very useful to someone who has smaller hands. So yeah, I think that's one aspect to it. I think also if you really like having secure ergos, really kind of comfortable ergos, if I had to choose between the two, I would choose the Mordax, and for the reasons I mentioned earlier. I would also, as I mentioned, the blade, being able to, the heft of it, and just how authoritative it is deploying and closing. I would recommend that if you care about that sort of thing, especially from a fidgeting side of things. And also, I haven't really talked about it too much, but like the sliciness, the cutting performance, this is thinner blade stock and it's a taller blade. And so the grind is a more, I guess, gradual, or like the angle of the bevels. I don't know how to describe what I'm saying, but basically it's a higher grind than the Malibu here. And so it's just a more slicey blade overall. And, you know, I would say this would be just in general like a good sized primary carry. I would not consider this a secondary carry knife unless you're Shaquille O'Neal, you know, someone who's a freaking giant. But for normal sized human beings, you know, like I'm 6 foot nothing person, and so this is like more than enough knife as a primary carry for me. Now the Malibu, who I recommend this for, I mean, this is perfect for people with medium or smaller hands, because with my medium hands, like I can get this grip. I guess if you're large, it probably wouldn't be too uncomfortable. Like there's still some room here at the end, but notice how there's like, you're not gonna get locked in here if you have like hands that kind of start going over the edge here. And so, and you really have to probably cram or choke up, or like really tighten your grip to fit like an XL, maybe even large hands here. I don't have large hands, so I can't tell you. But yeah, so it's definitely like, again, it's a smaller knife, so for smaller people it makes more sense than for larger people. And I say that now this is a lightweight knife comparatively speaking, so if you want like under 3 ounce knife, that if that matters to you, this is great in terms of blade to weight ratio, because it's 3.25 inches of blade and only 3 ounces in this configuration. So definitely great in that respect. Also, if you like a really snappy action, it really you know, deploys fast, this is it compared to the Mordax. The Mordax isn't as fast, not that it's slow, but it's just not as snappy. So yeah. Now if you also like a more utilitarian blade shape, this is definitely the way to go, just in the sense that you can either get a reverse Tanto or a Warncliffe version, where essentially the actual edge of the blade is about the same curvature regardless of the the blade shape overall, whether it's reverse tanto or Wharncliffe in this, or yeah, Wharncliffe in this case. And so if you like a more utilitarian blade shape, which I do, I would definitely recommend this. It's easier for like piercing and draw cuts and that sort of thing. Now, even though I said that this would be perfect for people with smaller hands, medium or small hands, I think this could be also a great secondary carry if you carry large knives. If you're a large person, you have big pockets, whatever it is. This isn't too heavy by any means, and it is, I would say, thin enough and small enough to where it just is. It wouldn't, like, I could see putting this, like slipping this in the corner of like one of your back pockets in your jeans or whatever, your pants. Not that I've done that personally, just because I'm not a large person like that, but you definitely could do that, I think. So yeah, and I think this is just a solid primary, like solid daily EDC, like truly EDC knife for people that are normal size, just small hands, whatever. So yeah, those are kind of like my recommendations on like which of these knives might be better fit for what kind of person. So in terms of availability, just one note, the Malibus are definitely in higher production numbers. The Mordax, it's kind of weird. It feels like they just send relatively small batches to dealers on a random basis. I mean, this version here is Blade Show Texas, so this wasn't even bought from a dealer. It was bought straight from ProTech at Blade Show. So that's this particular version. If you're going to Blade Show Atlanta 2023, I did see on their Instagram that they are doing a Blade Show exclusive, which is basically this version but with a black button. So like this button, imagine this button on this model, and there you go. So yeah, that's maybe your next chance to get one if you're really on the hunt for a Mordax for yourself or someone else. But yeah, the Malibus, I see they just released a few days like earlier this week. I think even there's I was surprised the operator Malibu has been sitting on Blade HQ for a few days. I don't know if that's going to be true as soon as this video is uploaded or after. I doubt it'll be there forever, but yeah, if you want operator Malibu, there are definitely some places that have it, or just the textured without the DLC blade. And 20 CV, unfortunately, I'm honestly, yeah, this is kind of transitioning away from availability into kind of, so like for me, I don't think I'll necessarily keep this forever. What I am hoping for ideally is a Malibu with a stonewash or whatever, yeah, stonewash, just non-DLC reverse tanto blade in Magna Cut, non 20 CV. I do not need 20 CV when Magna Cut exists. So that I can mod that. I would mod it to have a finger choil on it at least. Maybe even find someone that could be willing to deepen the finger choil here, so that I can actually install a thumb stud on the Malibu, because that would make it really, really fidgety and a lot more appealing to me personally. But I would also want one without this pattern. I would want to get like a custom, like a modded, like a third party work for engraving on the scales, just because I don't love the aesthetic of this pattern. It is fairly utilitarian. I just don't like the aesthetic of it personally. So yeah, but with the Mordax, I mentioned in my kind of 1 month review of the Mordax, I really like this knife. I feel very uncomfortable carrying this on a heavy basis, and the idea of using it for anything other than very light, like paper cutting task, is kind of makes me nervous, because it's just it's just a 1 of 100. So I'm like I'm very much a fan of using your stuff, but something this quote unquote rare, which I know is not the rarest thing in the world, but for someone in my tier of collecting, it is rare. So yeah, I would want to get a like basically a non-exclusive version, like one that's not numbered, basically with like a stonewash Magna Cut blade, where the only modification I'd want to make on it is adding a thumb stud. Like that would make this the perfect button lock to me almost. So yeah, I'm hoping that they do more general release honeycomb Mordaxes, that they also, I would assume that eventually they would do an operator Mordax, because ProTech does operator versions of basically all their knives. So I think that'd be really cool, because I like the look of the operator look, the sterile look. The one thing I don't like about my particular version is the fact that it has so much billboarding on it on both sides. So yeah, that's just me. So Yeah, this is my kind of my own comparison of these two knives. I think they're both great designs. You can't go wrong. It's more just, what is your what floats your boat. What are your needs? What are your desires? Your priorities? If you have any experience with one or both, feel free to comment in the comments and just let me know. Let other people know. I think that one of the benefits of the comment section is just hearing other people's experience that don't bother putting up their own videos but still have experience, and something worth sharing. So yeah, feel free to share any information, your own opinions, whatnot, in the comments. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them of me in the comments as well, and I'll try to get to them. So yeah, thanks for taking the time. Take care. Bye.